For most of human history, we believed one thing. We were alone, the only humans, the only ones who ever really mattered. That belief is now gone. Scientists have confirmed that multiple human species were alive at the same time, walking the same lands, hunting the same animals, surviving the same ice ages, not ancient ghosts separated from us by millions of years, beings close enough to look us in the eye. Some of them had bigger brains than we do. They made tools, they used fire, and there is evidence, real, physical evidence, that some of them buried their dead. Then, in a window of time that is almost nothing on the scale of life on Earth, they were gone. But here's what no one told you in school. We didn't arrive after them. We were there, living beside them. And in some cases, we know this from DNA. Some of them had children with us. Their genes didn't vanish. They're still here, inside you right now, woven into your biology, measurable with modern science. One group is so mysterious that for years, scientists knew it existed only from a single tiny bone fragment. No skull, no body, just a genetic signal, a ghost in our DNA, a species identified before anyone even knew what it looked like. So, if multiple kinds of humans once shared this planet, and the evidence says they did, what happened to them, and what does it mean that we alone survived? These are the questions that keep scientists awake at night. And this video is going to take you right into the middle of them. The boundary between one kind of human and another is not drawn in stone, but in shifting lines that blur the longer they are observed. What seems clear at a distance begins to soften up close, like footprints pressed into damp earth, their edges slowly dissolving as time passes. In biology, a species is often described as a group that can reproduce together and produce fertile offspring. It sounds precise, almost mechanical, yet the reality is quieter and far less rigid. Within a species, there can be smaller variations, populations shaped by geography, climate, and isolation. These are sometimes called subspecies, though even that word carries uncertainty, as if it tries to impose order on something that resists being neatly arranged. Early humans did not live in clean categories. They moved across landscapes that changed with ice and heat, rivers and deserts, following food, water, and survival. As groups spread out, they adapted in subtle ways. Bodies shifted, features altered, behaviors evolved. Over time, these differences deepened, but not always enough to fully separate one group from another. The genus Homo gathers these forms together, a broad family that includes many kinds of humans who once walked the earth. Some stood tall and traveled vast distances, others remained in isolated pockets, shaped by the boundaries around them. Each carried its own combination of traits, some familiar, some unexpected. What complicates everything is that these groups did not remain entirely separate. When paths crossed, they sometimes shared more than territory. Evidence preserved in genetic material shows that different human groups could have children together, and those children were not always the end of a line. They lived, grew, and passed their traits forward, weaving connections between populations that might otherwise appear distinct. This quiet exchange unsettles the idea of clear divisions. If two groups can meet and blend, even briefly, where does one end and the other begin? The older definitions begin to loosen, no longer able to hold the full picture. Instead of a tree with clean branches, the human story begins to resemble a network, threads crossing and reconnecting in ways that defy simple labels. Even within what is called modern humanity, variation remains. Populations separated by oceans or mountains carry differences shaped by their environments, yet they are still part of the same continuous whole. The boundaries that once seemed important fade when viewed through the deeper lens of shared ancestry. Science continues to refine these ideas, not by forcing sharper lines, but by accepting that nature rarely follows strict rules. The concept of a species becomes less about fixed definitions and more about patterns of connection, divergence, and reunion over immense stretches of time. In this light, being human is not a single condition, but a spectrum of forms that have overlapped, intertwined, and slowly transformed. The names assigned to each group are useful, guiding understanding and discussion, yet beneath those names lies a continuity that cannot be easily divided. The story of human species is not one of separation alone, but of contact, exchange, and gradual change. It is a reminder that the boundaries drawn by science are tools, not walls, and that the deeper reality is something more fluid, carried forward in every fragment of inherited life. Long before names were given, before any attempt to sort or define, there was a gradual turning that unfolded across the landscapes of Africa. It did not happen in a single moment, nor along a clear path, but through countless small shifts, each one carried forward in bone, in movement, in the quiet persistence of life adapting to its surroundings. Among earlier ancestors, bodies that once leaned forward began to rise, the spine adjusted, the hips reshaped, and steps grew steadier on two legs. This way of moving changed more than posture. It altered how distance was crossed, how energy was used, how eyes met the horizon. Standing upright allowed these early humans to see farther across open ground, to carry food, to free their hands for new purposes that had not yet fully taken form. Hands, once shaped mainly for climbing and grasping branches, began to take on a different kind of precision. Fingers curled not around bark but around stone. Simple fragments were selected, struck, and sharpened. These early tools were not refined, yet they marked a quiet transformation. With them came the ability to cut, to process, to reshape the environment in small but meaningful ways. The world was no longer only something to move through, but something that could be altered, even if only slightly. Within the skull, another change unfolded, slower but profound. Brain size increased over long stretches of time, not in sudden leaps but in steady expansion. This growth supported new patterns of thought, memory, and coordination. It allowed for more complex interactions with the environment, for learning that could be retained and passed along, for behavior that extended beyond immediate instinct. The earliest members of the Homo began to appear within this shifting balance of body and mind. They were not entirely separate from what came before, nor fully like those who would follow. They existed in between, carrying traces of older forms, while moving gradually toward something new. Their presence marked the beginning of a lineage that would spread, adapt, and diversify across vast stretches of time. The land itself played a constant role in shaping this emergence. Africa during this period was not fixed, but dynamic, with climates that shifted between wetter and drier phases. Forests receded, grasslands expanded, and resources changed in both abundance and location. Survival required flexibility. Those who could move efficiently across open terrain, who could use tools to access food, who could adjust to changing conditions, carried advantages that were subtle yet decisive over generations. This was not a story of intention, but of response. No plan guided these transformations. Instead, small variations accumulated, shaped by pressures that were often invisible in the moment. A slightly different stride, a marginally larger brain, a more effective tool, each became part of a broader pattern that only reveals itself when viewed across immense spans of time. As these early humans moved through their environment, they left behind faint traces, stone tools scattered across ancient ground, fragments of bone, impressions of presence that endure long after the individuals themselves are gone. These remnants do not tell a complete story, but they offer glimpses of a beginning that was neither sudden nor singular. From these origins, a lineage took shape, not as a straight ascent, but as a widening path. It carried forward the capacity for change, for adaptation, for interaction with a world that never remained still. In that slow unfolding, the first humans emerged, shaped as much by the land beneath their feet as by the bodies they carried through it. There is a moment in the long movement of human history when the horizon is no longer a boundary, but an invitation. It begins quietly, with footsteps that do not turn back, carrying a species beyond the lands where its lineage first took shape. These travelers belong to Homo erectus, a form of human whose journey would stretch farther and last longer than anything that came before. Their bodies were built for endurance. Long legs carried them across open ground, while a more balanced frame allowed steady movement over great distances. They did not wander aimlessly, but followed shifting patterns of water, vegetation, and animal life, moving with the rhythms of a changing world. Over generations, these movements extended beyond familiar territories, reaching into regions that had never known their presence. Across parts of Asia and into the edges of Europe, traces of their passage remain. Stone tools appear in new places, shaped with a growing sense of consistency. These were not the earliest tools, yet they carried a refinement that suggests memory and repetition, knowledge held and shared within groups. The hands that shaped them worked with purpose, guided by experience rather than chance. Among their most transformative abilities was the control of fire. It offered warmth in colder climates, light in darkness, and a way to alter food before it was consumed. Cooking softened tough fibers, released more energy, and changed the act of eating into something more efficient. Fire also extended the day, creating spaces where activity could continue after the sun had fallen, where social bonds could deepen in the quiet glow. This relationship with fire marked a shift not only in survival, but in how these humans occupied their environment. Landscapes were no longer faced passively. They could be shaped, even if only in small, temporary ways. The presence of fire left subtle marks, traces of ash and altered stone, faint signals of a species learning to interact with the world on new terms. Time moved differently for Homo erectus. They endured for nearly 2 million years, a span so vast that it allowed for variation within their own kind. Populations separated by distance developed their own characteristics, adapting to local conditions while remaining connected through shared origins. This long existence suggests a stability, a balance between body, behavior, and environment that could sustain itself across immense stretches of change. Their presence coincided with shifting climates, fluctuating between warmer and cooler periods. As environments transformed, so did the paths they followed. Some groups pressed onward, expanding into new territories, while others remained, adapting in place. This pattern of movement and settlement created a wide distribution, one that stretched across continents and endured through cycles of environmental change. The legacy of these travelers is not defined by a single innovation, but by a combination of traits that work together. Efficient movement, controlled use of fire, and the ability to produce reliable tools formed a foundation that supported their expansion. These were not sudden breakthroughs, but gradual developments, each one reinforcing the others over time. In the quiet persistence of their journey, a new scale of human presence emerged. The world was no longer a series of isolated habitats, but a connected expanse that could be crossed, inhabited, and revisited. Through their movement, the boundaries of human life expanded, carried forward by a species that walked steadily into the unknown and remained there for longer than any before it. Time, when stretched across deep history, does not separate lives as cleanly as it seems. Moments that feel distant begin to overlap, layers settling into one another until different kinds of humans share the same long horizon. Their lives unfold not in sequence, but alongside each other, woven into the same unfolding world. Across continents, multiple human species existed at once, each adapted to its own conditions, yet moving through periods that quietly intersected. Their timelines overlap like faint impressions pressed into the same surface, some deeper, some lighter, all part of a shared span that cannot be divided into simple before and after. The idea of one replacing another dissolves under closer examination, replaced by a more intricate presence. The genus Homo held within it a diversity that extended across regions and climates. In some places, robust forms lived in cooler environments, their bodies shaped by colder air and seasonal shifts. Elsewhere, more slender forms adapted to warmer landscapes, moving with different rhythms and challenges. Each carried its own history, yet none existed entirely alone within its time. Evidence of this coexistence rests in scattered remains and shared spaces. Stone tools appear in layers that suggest different groups used similar locations across overlapping periods. Fossils dated within close ranges reveal that these humans did not simply follow one another, but lived during the same stretches of time, sometimes close enough that their paths may have crossed. The record is incomplete, yet what emerges is a quiet suggestion of a world more populated, more varied than once imagined. This complexity reshapes the way the human past is understood. Instead of a ladder rising step by step toward a single outcome, the pattern resembles a branching structure with multiple lines extending outward, sometimes diverging, sometimes intersecting. Some branches continued, others ended, yet all were part of the same unfolding process. No single path held dominance from the beginning, and no outcome was guaranteed. The earth they inhabited reflected this diversity. Environments shifted between dense forests, open plains, and rugged highlands, each offering different resources and demands. In one region, a group might rely on hunting large animals across wide terrain. In another, smaller game and gathered plants shaped a different way of life. These variations encouraged distinct adaptations, reinforcing the differences between groups while maintaining their place within a shared lineage. Movement across these landscapes created zones of contact. Rivers, valleys, and migration routes became places where different human groups could approach one another, sometimes leaving traces that hint at proximity. The possibility of encounter becomes part of the story, not as a dramatic event, but as a quiet reality within a world where boundaries were fluid and often temporary. Within this overlapping existence, diversity was not an exception, but the norm. Multiple forms of humanity lived out their lives under the same shifting skies, each shaped by its environment, each contributing to a broader tapestry of human presence. Their differences did not isolate them completely, nor did their similarities merge them into one. What remains is a vision of the past that is layered and interconnected, where coexistence replaces succession, and where the human story expands beyond a single line into something more intricate. In that shared span of time, the world held many kinds of humans at once, each a part of a wider, unfolding continuum that cannot be reduced to a simple progression. In the colder reaches of ancient landscapes, where winters stretched longer and light often felt distant, another kind of human lived with a presence both distinct and deeply familiar. They were not separate in the way once imagined, but close enough in form and behavior to feel like a variation of something already known. These were the Neanderthals, a branch of humanity shaped by conditions that demanded resilience and precision. Their bodies carried the marks of that environment. Shorter limbs and broader chests conserved heat, while strong muscles supported movement across uneven, often frozen terrain. Faces were structured differently, with pronounced brows and wide nasal passages that may have helped warm cold air before it reached the lungs. Every feature seemed tuned to a world where survival depended on enduring harsh seasons that returned again and again. Within their skulls, space was not lacking. On average, Neanderthal brains were as large as, and often slightly larger than, those of modern humans. This did not translate into a simple measure of ability, but it suggests a complexity that cannot be dismissed. Their minds were adapted to their lives, shaped by the demands of hunting, navigating, and surviving in environments that required careful attention to detail and timing. Traces of their behavior reveal more than physical strength. Injuries found in skeletal remains show signs of healing, indicating that individuals who could no longer hunt or move easily were not abandoned. They were supported, protected, and allowed to recover over time. This quiet evidence speaks of social bonds, of groups that recognize the value of each member beyond immediate usefulness. In some sites, arrangements of bones and objects suggest a deliberate handling of the dead. The exact meaning remains uncertain, yet the act itself implies an awareness that extended beyond the present moment. Whether through ritual, memory, or instinct, there was a recognition of loss, a gesture that carried significance within their communities. Tools associated with Neanderthals show a level of skill that reflects planning and learned technique. Stone was shaped with consistency, producing implements suited for specific tasks. These tools were not random creations, but the result of knowledge passed through generations, refined over time through use and observation. For many years, their image was shaped by misunderstanding. Early interpretations cast them as crude or lacking, defined by physical differences rather than the fuller picture of their lives. This view has gradually shifted as new evidence emerges, revealing a species capable of adaptation, cooperation, and complex behavior. The contrast between past assumptions and present understanding highlights how easily perception can obscure reality. Their world overlapped with others, their presence part of the broader human story already unfolding. In certain regions, they lived through cycles of change, adjusting to variations in climate and resources with a persistence that endured for thousands of years. Their existence was not brief or incidental, but sustained, grounded in an ability to navigate the challenges of their environment. Seen from a distance, they may appear as a separate chapter, yet up close, the differences soften. The line between them and other humans becomes less rigid, shaped by shared traits and parallel developments. They remain distinct, yet not distant, a reflection of how varied humanity once was within a single, interconnected past. In their presence, the idea of what it means to be human expands, shaped not by a single form, but by a range of expressions carried across time. In a quiet laboratory, far removed from the landscapes where ancient lives once unfolded, a fragment no larger than a fingertip revealed something unexpected. It was not a complete skeleton or a carefully preserved skull, but a single bone, small and unassuming, carrying within it a record far richer than its size suggested. From this fragment, a new kind of human presence began to emerge, one that had left almost no visible trace. The discovery did not begin with shape or structure, but with genetic patterns. When scientists examined the DNA preserved within that bone, they found sequences that did not fully match any known human group. It was not Neanderthals, though it shared a distant connection, and it was not modern human. It belonged to something else, a lineage that had remained hidden, not through absence, but through the quiet scarcity of physical remains. This group came to be known as the Denisovans, named after the cave where that first fragment was found. Yet, even with a name, their form remained largely unknown. No complete image could be drawn from bone alone because there were so few bones to study. Instead, their presence was traced through genetic echoes, patterns carried forward in living populations. These echoes revealed a wide and surprising range. Denisovan DNA appears in people across parts of Asia and into regions of Oceania, suggesting that this group once occupied a broad expanse of land. Their movements, like those of others before them, followed the shifting conditions of the Earth, adapting to environments that varied from high altitudes to island landscapes separated by stretches of water. One of the most striking contributions linked to the Denisovans lies within populations living in high mountain regions. Certain genetic traits associated with oxygen use and altitude tolerance appear to have been inherited from them, allowing modern humans to live in environments where the air is thin and the conditions are demanding. This inheritance is not visible in form, but it persists in function, woven into the physiology of those who carry it. The relationship between Denisovans and other human groups was not distant or isolated. Genetic evidence shows that they interbred with both Neanderthals and modern humans at different points in time. These encounters were not singular events, but part of a pattern of contact that connected different branches of humanity. Through this exchange, their presence extended beyond their own populations, becoming part of a shared biological history. What makes their story unusual is the way it has been uncovered. Most ancient humans are known first through their physical remains, their bones providing the foundation for understanding. Denisovans appeared in reverse, identified through DNA before their physical form was clearly understood. It is a reminder that the past can be recorded in ways that are not immediately visible, held within molecules that endure long after bodies have faded. The landscapes they once inhabited have changed, and the traces they left behind are few, yet their influence remains detectable. Not in monuments or widespread fossil records, but in the subtle variations carried within living people. Their existence reshapes the idea of how many human groups once shared the world, expanding it beyond what can be seen directly. In this quiet reconstruction, a species emerges without a face, known through fragments and sequences rather than full forms. Their story is incomplete, yet it is undeniably present, carried forward in ways that blur the boundary between past and present, between those who are gone and those who remain. Far beneath the surface, where light does not naturally reach and space narrows into quiet stone corridors, a discovery emerged that did not fit easily into what was already known. It began in a cave system in South Africa, deep within passages so confined that movement required careful navigation, bodies turning sideways, breaths measured against the stillness of the air. In that hidden space, a collection of bones rested, undisturbed for an immense span of time. These remains belonged to a species later named Homo naledi, a form of human that carried an unusual combination of features. Some aspects of their anatomy appeared familiar within the broader human lineage, while others seemed to reach further back, echoing traits associated with much earlier ancestors. Their hands, for instance, showed a capacity for precision, suggesting an ability to manipulate objects with care, yet the curvature of their fingers hinted at a history of climbing. Their feet were structured in a way that supported upright walking, while other parts of their skeleton retained more primitive proportions. This blending of characteristics created a presence that did not align neatly with expectations. It suggested that evolution did not move in a single, uniform direction, but could preserve older traits alongside newer developments. Within Homo naledi, this mixture formed a body adapted to its own particular way of moving through the world, one that cannot be easily compared to a simple progression from past to present. The location of the remains adds another layer to their story. The bones were found deep within the cave, in areas that would have been difficult to access even with modern understanding of the terrain. There is no clear evidence that natural forces carried them there in large numbers. Instead, the placement suggests a repeated pattern, as though individuals were brought into that space intentionally over time. This possibility introduces the idea of deliberate behavior, an act that goes beyond immediate survival. If these placements were indeed intentional, they may represent a form of mortuary practice, a way of handling the dead that implies awareness and social structure. Such behavior has often been associated with more cognitively complex humans, yet Homo naledi possessed a brain size that was relatively small compared to many others within the genus. This contrast challenges the assumption that certain behaviors require a particular scale of brain development. Their existence invites a reconsideration of how intelligence is understood. Rather than being measured solely by size or by a single set of traits, it appears to emerge in different forms, shaped by environment, social interaction, and necessity. The behaviors suggested by the evidence do not align neatly with older frameworks, indicating that complexity can arise in ways that are not immediately predictable. The cave itself, with its narrow passages and hidden chambers, becomes part of this narrative. It served not only as a place of preservation, but possibly as a space of repeated return. The act of entering such a confined environment would have required coordination and familiarity, reinforcing the idea of shared knowledge within a group. In the quiet darkness, where these remains were found, a different kind of human story takes shape, one that resists simple categorization. It speaks of variation within the human lineage that extends beyond what was once expected, revealing forms of life that developed along paths both connected and distinct. On a small island surrounded by shifting seas, where isolation shapes life in subtle and lasting ways, a different kind of human once moved through dense vegetation and along uneven ground. Their presence remained unknown for most of history, not because it was insignificant, but because it was contained within a place that rarely revealed its deeper past. When their remains were finally uncovered in Indonesia, they carried proportions that seemed almost improbable within the human story. These were Homo floresiensis, a population marked by a notably small body size. Adults stood little more than a meter tall, their limbs compact, their overall frame reduced compared to other known humans. This form was not the result of a single change, but part of a broader pattern often seen in isolated environments, where limited resources can guide the evolution of smaller bodies over long periods of time. Their skulls revealed another unexpected detail. Brain size was considerably smaller than that of most other humans, closer in scale to much earlier ancestors. At first glance, this seemed to place them outside the patterns associated with more recent human development. Yet the objects found alongside their remains suggested a more complex picture, one that could not be explained by size alone. Stone tools discovered in the same layers show evidence of deliberate shaping and repeated use. These implements were suited for tasks that required coordination and planning, indicating that their makers possessed the ability to understand materials and apply learned techniques. The presence of such tools suggests a level of behavioral complexity that does not align neatly with assumptions based solely on brain volume. Traces of animal remains found near these tools indicate that Homo floresiensis engaged in hunting or scavenging activities. Some of the prey species were larger than the humans themselves, requiring cooperation or strategy to access. This interaction with the environment reflects an ability to adapt and survive within the specific conditions of the island, where resources and challenges differed from those of larger landmasses. Their existence also extends closer to the present than might be expected for a group with such ancient characteristics. Evidence suggests that they lived until relatively recent periods, overlapping in time with other human populations in nearby regions. This temporal proximity adds another layer to their story, placing them not in a distant and isolated past, but within a shared time frame that includes other forms of humanity. Isolation played a central role in shaping their development. The island environment limited contact with outside populations, allowing unique traits to persist and evolve without being blended into broader human diversity. Over generations, this separation created a distinct form, one that reflects both its ancestry and the specific pressures of its surroundings. The combination of small stature, reduced brain size, and clear evidence of tool use challenges simple narratives about human evolution. It suggests that intelligence and adaptability can take forms that do not conform to expected patterns. Within Homo floresiensis, these elements come together in a way that broadens the understanding of what it means to be human. In the quiet record preserved within that island, a different expression of humanity emerges, one shaped by isolation, resourcefulness, and time. Their presence remains a reminder that the human story is not defined by a single path, but by a range of forms that have adapted to the many environments of the earth. In a region defined by scattered islands and shifting shorelines, where land is separated by narrow stretches of sea, another fragment of the human story surfaced quietly. It came not from a complete skeleton, but from a collection of teeth and small bones found within a cave on the island of Luzon. These remains, modest in number, carried details that did not fully align with any known group, suggesting a presence that had remained hidden within the boundaries of its environment. This population was named Homo luzonensis, and from the beginning, its identity resisted simple placement. The features preserved in those fragments showed a combination that felt unfamiliar. Some aspects resembled traits associated with much earlier human forms, while others reflected more recent developments. The teeth, in particular, displayed shapes and proportions not commonly seen together, hinting at a lineage that had followed its own path for a considerable span of time. The island setting plays a central role in understanding this uniqueness. Isolation, once established, can guide evolution in directions that differ from broader continental patterns. Populations separated by water experience limited contact with others, allowing certain traits to persist and change without being blended into larger groups. Over many generations, this separation can produce forms that appear both connected and distinct, carrying echoes of the past alongside features shaped by local conditions. In the case of Homo luzonensis, the environment of Luzon would have offered its own challenges and opportunities. Dense forests, varied terrain, and shifting climates created a setting that required adaptability. Movement across such landscapes would have favored certain physical traits, while the availability of resources would have influenced behavior and survival strategies. Though direct evidence of their daily activities remains limited, the structure of their remains suggests a population well suited to its surroundings. What makes this discovery particularly significant is how little was previously known. Before these remains were studied, there was no clear indication that such a group existed. Unlike other human populations identified through more extensive fossil records or genetic traces, this one emerged almost entirely from a small collection of physical evidence. It is a reminder that the human past is not fully mapped and that entire populations can remain unnoticed until a chance finding brings them into view. The presence of Homo luzonensis also adds to the growing pattern of island populations developing distinct characteristics. Similar processes observed elsewhere suggest that isolation can lead to unexpected variations, challenging assumptions about how human evolution unfolds. Rather than following a single, predictable trajectory, these populations demonstrate that multiple paths can exist simultaneously, each shaped by its own context. As more discoveries emerge from different regions, the possibility of additional unknown groups becomes more apparent. The gaps in the record are not empty spaces, but areas where evidence has yet to be found or recognized. Each new finding expands the understanding of how diverse the human lineage once was, revealing forms that do not fit neatly into established categories. In the quiet presence of these few bones, a broader implication takes shape. The story of humanity is still incomplete, its details scattered across landscapes that continue to hold undiscovered traces. Within that uncertainty, the existence of hidden populations becomes not an exception, but an expected part of a history that is far more intricate than it once seemed. What remains of the past is shaped as much by absence as by presence. For every fragment of bone uncovered, there are countless others that never endured, dissolved slowly into soil, scattered by time, or lost to conditions that leave no trace behind. The record that survives is not a complete account, but a fragile selection, shaped by chance and circumstance. Fossilization itself is a rare event. For a body to become preserved, it must pass through a precise set of conditions. It must be quickly covered by sediment, protected from scavengers, and held in an environment where decay slows enough for minerals to replace organic material. Even then, the process is uncertain. Most remains never reach this stage, returning instead to the cycle of decomposition, leaving no lasting imprint. Across vast stretches of time, entire populations can live and disappear without leaving behind a single recognizable fossil. Their existence may be reflected only in subtle traces, tools, altered landscapes, or genetic patterns carried forward in other groups. The absence of physical remains does not indicate absence of life, but rather the limits of what can be preserved and later found. Where fossils are discovered is also influenced by where attention is directed. Scientific exploration tends to focus on certain regions, often shaped by accessibility, historical interest, or available resources. Areas that are remote, densely vegetated, or politically unstable may remain largely unexplored, their histories still buried beneath layers that have yet to be examined. This uneven distribution of research creates gaps, not in the past itself, but in the way it is revealed. Even within studied regions, the act of discovery depends on chance. A fragment may lie just beyond the reach of excavation or remain hidden until erosion or human activity brings it to light. Many significant finds begin with small, unexpected observations, a piece of bone exposed by shifting earth, a surface disturbed just enough to reveal what lies beneath. Without such moments, entire chapters of human history could remain unknown. The idea of the genus Homo is built upon what has been found, yet it also carries the weight of what has not. Known species represent only those that have left enough evidence to be recognized. Beyond them may exist others, populations that lived in isolation or under conditions unfavorable to preservation, their forms and behaviors unrecorded in the fossil record. This incomplete picture requires a careful approach. Interpretations must account for what is missing as much as for what is present. Each discovery adds detail, but also highlights the spaces that remain unfilled. The pattern that emerges is not a finished image, but an evolving one, shaped by new findings and the gradual uncovering of hidden evidence. Advances in methods, such as ancient DNA analysis, have begun to reveal traces of populations that left little or no physical remains. These genetic signals suggest that the diversity of human forms was greater than what fossils alone can show. They point toward a past that is more complex, where entire groups may be known only through the faint imprint they left within others. In this quiet uncertainty, the story of human evolution remains open. The missing fossils are not merely gaps, but reminders of how much has yet to be understood. Within those unseen spaces, the possibility of undiscovered histories persists, waiting in places where time has kept its record hidden. Within every living cell, a quiet archive endures, written not in stone or sediment, but in sequences so small they remain invisible without careful study. This record does not preserve shape or voice, yet it carries something just as lasting, a continuity that stretches across generations, holding fragments of lives that have long since passed. The study of ancient DNA has opened a path into this hidden archive. From bone, tooth, or even traces left in soil, genetic material can sometimes be recovered, though it rarely remains intact. Time breaks it into smaller pieces, chemical changes alter its structure, and contamination from the present can obscure its original form. Extracting meaning from these fragments requires methods that are both precise and patient, assembling scattered sequences into patterns that can be compared and understood. Through this process, scientists have identified human groups that were never clearly seen in the fossil record. Genetic signatures appear within modern populations, revealing connections to lineages that left little physical evidence behind. These signals are not complete portraits, but they offer a presence, a suggestion of diversity that extends beyond what bones alone can show. The genus Homo becomes more intricate when viewed through this lens. DNA reveals intersections where populations once met, traces of shared ancestry that cannot be observed directly in physical remains. It shows that the human story includes exchanges and continuities that stretch across time, linking groups in ways that are subtle yet measurable. Some of the most unexpected findings have come from these genetic studies. Traits found in certain populations today can be traced back to ancient humans who lived in very different environments. Adaptations related to climate, altitude, and resistance to disease appear to have been inherited through these connections, carried forward long after the original populations have disappeared. These inherited elements do not announce their origins, yet they persist within the body, influencing how it responds to the world. The process of working with ancient DNA is delicate. Samples must be handled in controlled conditions to prevent modern contamination, and the fragments recovered are often incomplete. Advanced techniques are used to read these sequences, comparing them with known genomes to identify similarities and differences. Each step requires careful verification, as errors can easily arise when working with material that has been altered over thousands of years. Despite its power, DNA does not provide a complete account. It cannot fully reconstruct appearance, behavior, or culture. It offers patterns and relationships, but leaves much of the lived experience beyond reach. In some cases, genetic data suggests the existence of populations that have not yet been identified through fossils, creating a sense of presence without form. There are also limits to where DNA can be preserved. Warm and humid environments tend to break it down more rapidly, reducing the likelihood of recovery. This creates an uneven record, where some regions yield detailed genetic information while others remain largely silent. The absence of DNA in these areas does not imply absence of past life, but reflects the conditions that affect preservation. Within these constraints, the study of DNA continues to expand the understanding of human history. It reveals connections that are not visible in the physical record, offering a different perspective on how populations interacted and evolved. The hidden archive within living cells becomes a bridge between past and present, carrying forward traces of lives that can no longer be seen, yet are still part of the ongoing human story. In certain stretches of deep time, separation did not remain absolute. Distinct human groups, shaped by different environments and histories, came into contact, and in those moments, boundaries softened in ways that left lasting traces. These encounters were not preserved in written records or visible monuments, but in the subtle continuity carried within living cells. Genetic studies have revealed that modern humans share segments of DNA with Neanderthals, a connection that points to interbreeding between these groups. This is not a distant or symbolic link, but a measurable inheritance. Small portions of Neanderthal DNA remain present in many populations today, particularly those whose ancestors lived outside of Africa. These fragments are not uniform, but vary from person to person, distributed unevenly across the genome. A similar pattern appears with the Denisovans. Their genetic contributions are especially noticeable in populations across parts of Asia and Oceania, where specific sequences have been passed down through generations. These inherited elements are not merely remnants, but active components of the human genome, influencing traits that persist in the present. The existence of these shared sequences reflects encounters that occurred thousands of years ago when different human groups lived within overlapping regions. These interactions were not constant, but they were significant enough to leave a lasting imprint. Over time, as populations moved and changed, the genetic contributions from these encounters became integrated into broader human diversity. This blending challenges the idea of species as entirely separate and self-contained. Traditional definitions often rely on the assumption that species do not produce fertile offspring when they meet. Yet the genetic evidence shows that such exchanges did occur among human groups, and that the resulting offspring were capable of continuing their lineages. The boundaries that once seemed clear begin to appear more fluid, shaped by interaction rather than strict division. Within the genus Homo, this fluidity becomes a defining feature. Different populations diverged over time, adapting to their environments and developing distinct traits, yet they retained enough biological compatibility to reconnect when their paths crossed. This pattern suggests a network of relationships rather than isolated branches, with moments of separation followed by periods of contact. The inherited DNA from these interactions continues to influence modern humans in subtle ways. Certain genes associated with immune response, for example, appear to have been shaped by contributions from Neanderthals, potentially offering advantages in adapting to new environments. In other cases, Denisovan DNA has been linked to physiological traits that support survival in specific conditions, such as regions with lower oxygen levels. These genetic legacies are not always visible, yet they form part of the underlying structure of the human body. They are carried forward without conscious awareness, integrated into the processes that govern how individuals respond to their surroundings. The past remains present, not as a distant memory, but as an active component of biological function. Through this lens, the human story becomes one of connection as much as divergence. The lines that separate different groups are not fixed barriers, but shifting boundaries that have been crossed and recrossed over time. In the quiet persistence of inherited DNA, the evidence of these encounters endures, linking modern humans to a broader and more interconnected past. Beneath the surface of the present, within processes that unfold without notice, fragments of older lives continue their quiet work. They do not appear as visible markers or clear distinctions, but as subtle influences woven into the body's responses, shaping how it meets the conditions around it. Among these inherited elements are genetic contributions from Neanderthals, carried forward through generations since the moments when different human groups met and shared more than space. Some of these contributions are linked to the immune system, affecting how the body recognizes and responds to pathogens. In unfamiliar environments, where new diseases were present, such inherited traits may have offered an advantage, allowing individuals to adapt more effectively to microbial challenges that had shaped other populations over long periods. These adaptations are not uniform, and their effects vary across individuals and regions. Certain immune responses influenced by Neanderthal DNA appear to increase resistance to specific infections, while others may contribute to heightened sensitivity or inflammation under different conditions. The same genetic inheritance can carry both benefits and complications, reflecting the complexity of traits shaped in past environments that differ from those of today. From the Denisovans comes another form of inheritance, one that is especially evident in populations living at high altitudes. In these regions, where oxygen levels are lower, specific genetic variations support more efficient use of available oxygen. These traits allow individuals to function with less strain in environments that would otherwise challenge the body's ability to sustain normal activity. The presence of these adaptations reveals how interactions between different human groups contributed to survival in diverse and demanding conditions. Beyond these physiological traits, other inherited features remain present in more subtle ways. Variations in skin, hair, and metabolism can be traced in part to ancient genetic contributions, though they are shaped by many factors over time. These characteristics do not point directly to a single origin, but they carry traces of a shared past, blended through generations into the diversity seen today. The influence of ancient DNA extends into modern health in ways that are still being understood. Certain genetic variants inherited from earlier human groups have been associated with increased risk or protection in relation to specific conditions. For example, some immune-related genes may affect susceptibility to autoimmune disorders, while others influence how the body responds to environmental stresses. These connections are complex, often involving interactions between multiple genes and external factors, making their full impact difficult to isolate. Within the broader context of the genus Homo, these inherited traits highlight the continuity that links past and present. They show that the boundaries between different human groups were not absolute, and that the exchange of genetic material has played a role in shaping the capabilities and vulnerabilities of modern populations. The body carries this history quietly, without distinction between what originated recently and what has been passed down from much earlier times. Each inherited fragment becomes part of a larger system, integrated into functions that operate continuously and often unnoticed. The past remains active, not as a separate layer, but as part of the ongoing processes that sustain life. In this way, ancient interactions continue to influence the present, not through visible reminders, but through the subtle workings of biology. The traits that once supported survival in distant environments persist, adapted to new conditions, yet still connected to the long and intricate story of human existence. Where different human groups moved through the same terrain, their lives unfolded within shared limits set by the land itself. Food did not appear in endless supply, and water followed patterns that shifted with seasons and climate. Within these constraints, survival depended on access, timing, and the ability to make use of what was available before it disappeared. In regions where populations overlapped, the same animals, plants, and water sources would have drawn them into proximity. Herds moved along predictable paths, and edible plants followed cycles tied to rainfall and temperature. These patterns created points of convergence, places where different groups might arrive separately, guided by the same needs. The presence of multiple human species within these spaces suggests that they were navigating similar challenges, shaped by the same environmental pressures. Competition in this context was not always direct or visible. It could take the form of timing, with one group reaching a resource earlier and leaving little behind. It could emerge through efficiency, where differences in hunting techniques or tool use allowed certain groups to secure more food with less effort. Over time, even small advantages could influence survival, especially in environments where resources were limited or unpredictable. Hunting strategies varied among human groups, reflecting both physical traits and learned behavior. Some relied on endurance, tracking animals over long distances until exhaustion slowed them. Others may have focused on ambush, using knowledge of terrain to approach prey more closely before striking. The tools they carried, shaped by tradition and necessity, played a role in how these strategies were carried out. Sharpened stone, carefully crafted and maintained, became an extension of skill, linking knowledge across generations. Efficiency extended beyond the hunt itself. The ability to process food quickly, to store or share it within a group, influenced how well resources could be used. Groups that developed more effective ways of organizing these tasks may have experienced greater stability, especially during periods when food was scarce. Social structures, though not directly visible in the fossil record, likely contributed to how resources were distributed and preserved. Scarcity was not constant, but it returned often enough to shape behavior. Changes in climate could alter the availability of plants and animals, forcing groups to adapt or move. During these periods, competition may have intensified, not necessarily through confrontation, but through the narrowing of options. The same landscape that once supported multiple populations could become more difficult to navigate, placing pressure on all who depended on it. Within the genus Homo, these overlapping lives created a complex dynamic. Different species, each with its own adaptations, occupied shared spaces while responding in distinct ways. Some may have held advantages in certain conditions, while others were better suited to different environments. The balance between them was not fixed, but shifted with changes in climate, resources, and movement. The evidence for these interactions remains subtle, found in patterns rather than direct records. Overlapping tool traditions, shared sites, and the timing of fossil remains suggest proximity, yet the nature of their encounters is often left to inference. What can be seen is the outcome, a gradual shaping of populations influenced by the pressures of living within the same world. In these shared landscapes, survival was not determined by a single factor, but by a combination of adaptability, knowledge, and circumstance. Each group moved within the same limits, yet found its own way through them, leaving behind traces of a quiet and persistent competition shaped by the resources that sustained them. Across long stretches of time, the ground beneath human movement did not remain constant. Temperatures rose and fell, ice advanced and retreated, and familiar pathways slowly transformed into something unrecognizable. These changes unfolded over thousands of years, yet their effects shaped each generation in ways that were immediate and unavoidable. During periods of glaciation, vast ice sheets extended across large portions of the northern continents, altering wind patterns, sea levels, and the distribution of plants and animals. Regions that once supported a wide range of life became colder and more difficult to inhabit, while other areas opened as new environments emerged. These shifts created a landscape in motion, where stability was temporary and adaptation became essential. For human populations, survival depended on responding to these changes. As climates shifted, so did the availability of food and water. Animals followed new migration routes, vegetation patterns altered, and familiar resources could disappear within a few generations. Groups that relied on specific environments were often forced to move, tracing the edges of changing conditions in search of more reliable ground. Migration became a recurring pattern, not as a single event, but as a continuous adjustment to a world that refused to remain still. Some populations expanded into new territories as conditions allowed, while others retreated from regions that became less hospitable. These movements were shaped by geography, with mountains, rivers, and coastlines guiding the paths taken across the land. Within the genus Homo, different groups responded to these pressures in varied ways. Some adapted to colder climates through physical and behavioral changes, while others remained in more temperate regions, adjusting to different sets of challenges. The diversity of responses reflects the range of environments occupied by human populations, each requiring its own form of resilience. Rapid climate shifts could have profound effects on smaller populations. Groups with limited numbers were particularly vulnerable to sudden changes, as they had fewer individuals to sustain genetic diversity and fewer resources to buffer against scarcity. A shift in temperature or rainfall could reduce available food, disrupt established patterns of movement, and place additional strain on already fragile communities. In such conditions, even minor differences in adaptability could influence long-term survival. The ability to modify behavior, to adjust diets, or to move efficiently across changing terrain became critical. Populations that could respond more flexibly to environmental shifts were more likely to persist, while others faced increasing pressure that could lead to decline. The changing landscapes also created new connections and separations between groups. Lower sea levels during colder periods exposed land bridges, allowing movement between regions that would later become isolated again. As conditions changed, these pathways could disappear, dividing populations and leading to distinct evolutionary paths. Isolation and contact alternated over time, shaping the distribution and diversity of human groups. Evidence of these patterns is preserved in geological records, in the layering of sediments, and in the distribution of fossils across different regions. These traces reveal a world in constant transition, where human presence was intertwined with environmental change. The story that emerges is one of adaptation within a shifting framework, where survival depended not on a fixed set of conditions, but on the ability to respond to continual transformation. In this ongoing interplay between climate and life, human populations were both shaped by and responsive to the forces around them, moving within a world that was never static but always in the process of becoming something new. In quiet corners of the past, some human groups existed not as vast populations spread across continents, but as small clusters moving through limited ranges, their numbers counted in dozens, or perhaps a few hundred at most. Their presence was steady but delicate, sustained by a balance that could shift with little warning. Within these small populations, every individual carried a greater share of the group's future. Genetic diversity, the range of variation within a population, depended on the number of individuals contributing to each generation. When numbers remained low, this diversity narrowed. Traits became more uniform, and the capacity to adapt to new challenges could diminish over time. This narrowing did not always produce immediate effects. A population could persist for many generations, maintaining its way of life within familiar conditions. Yet when environments changed, or when new pressures emerged, the limits of reduced diversity could become more apparent. Without a wide range of genetic variation, the ability to respond to disease, climate shifts, or new ecological demands could be constrained. Within the genus Homo, many species likely existed in such fragile states. Their distribution across landscapes was uneven, with some groups occupying isolated regions where contact with others was infrequent or absent. These conditions allowed unique traits to develop, yet they also increased vulnerability as isolation reduced opportunities for genetic exchange. Random events played a significant role in shaping the fate of these populations. A sudden change in weather, a prolonged drought, or a shift in the availability of food could have disproportionate effects on small groups. Where larger populations might absorb such changes, smaller ones faced greater risk. The loss of even a few individuals could alter the balance, affecting reproduction, social structure, and the transmission of knowledge. Natural disasters added another layer of uncertainty. Floods, volcanic activity, or abrupt environmental changes could impact entire regions, leaving little opportunity for recovery. In such cases, populations that had endured for long periods could disappear within a relatively short span, their presence leaving only faint traces in the record. Disease, too, could move differently through small populations. While limited numbers might slow the spread in some cases, the introduction of a new illness could still have severe consequences, especially where genetic variation was low. The ability to resist or recover from infection depended on traits that might not be present within a constrained gene pool. Reproductive challenges also contributed to fragility. In small populations, the likelihood of close genetic relationships increased, which could lead to reduced fertility or the expression of harmful traits. Over time, these factors could influence the overall health and stability of the group, further narrowing the path to survival. Despite these risks, small populations were not without resilience. Their survival often depended on deep knowledge of their environment, refined over generations. They understood the rhythms of their surroundings, the locations of resources, and the patterns that guided their movement. This knowledge provided stability, yet it was closely tied to specific conditions, and when those conditions changed, adaptation required more than familiarity. The disappearance of a species does not always leave a clear boundary in time. It can occur gradually as numbers decline and territories contract, or more abruptly when a series of pressures converge. In many cases, the end leaves little visible trace, blending into the broader flow of history. In these quiet extinctions, the fragility of small populations becomes evident, shaped by forces both predictable and unforeseen. Within a world where survival was never guaranteed, and continuity depended on a balance that could be easily disrupted. At the edge of contact, where different human groups moved close enough to share space for a time, another exchange may have unfolded, one that left no tools or bones to mark its presence. It moved quietly, carried within bodies rather than hands, passing from one individual to another without intention or awareness. In these moments, proximity itself became a pathway. Pathogens, shaped by long association with particular hosts, can exist in balance within one population while becoming disruptive in another. When groups that had evolved separately came into contact, the microorganisms they carried may have crossed those boundaries as well. For populations that had not encountered certain diseases before, the absence of prior exposure meant that immune responses were unprepared, creating conditions where illness could spread more easily. This vulnerability was especially pronounced in isolated groups. Over long periods of separation, their immune systems adapted to the specific pathogens present in their environment. While this specialization could be effective within familiar conditions, it also meant that new exposures carried greater risk. A pathogen introduced from another group might encounter little resistance, affecting individuals in ways that differed from its original context. Within the broader history of the genus Homo, such exchanges may have influenced patterns of survival. Disease does not act with intention, yet its effects can shape populations over time. An outbreak within a small group could reduce numbers quickly, altering social structure and limiting the capacity for recovery. In combination with other pressures, this could contribute to gradual decline. The interaction between disease and population size is particularly significant. Smaller groups, already facing constraints related to genetic diversity and resource availability, have less capacity to absorb additional losses. The impact of illness in such contexts extends beyond immediate mortality, affecting reproduction, knowledge transfer, and the stability of the group as a whole. Evidence for these processes is difficult to trace directly. Unlike bones or tools, pathogens rarely leave clear signatures in the archaeological record. Some indications can be found in skeletal remains, where certain diseases produce identifiable changes, yet many infections do not preserve such marks. Genetic studies can reveal traces of past adaptations to disease, suggesting encounters that shaped immune systems over time, but these signals often lack precise detail about when or how transmission occurred. The limitations of the evidence require careful interpretation. It is possible to infer that disease played a role in shaping human populations, yet the extent and specifics of that role remain uncertain. The absence of direct proof does not negate its influence, but it does place boundaries on what can be concluded with confidence. Contact between groups brought multiple forms of exchange, some visible and others hidden. Alongside the sharing of genes and knowledge, the transfer of microorganisms formed part of the same process, unfolding within the same moments of proximity. These exchanges did not occur in isolation, but within a network of interactions that included environment, behavior, and chance. Over time, the effects of disease would have blended with other factors, contributing to the broader patterns observed in the human past. Its presence, though often unseen, forms part of the complex interplay that shaped which populations endured and which did not. In the quiet passage of these invisible agents, another layer of connection emerges, one that reflects both the closeness and the vulnerability inherent in moments of contact, carried forward without leaving a clear trace, yet influencing the course of human existence in ways that remain only partially understood. Across different human groups, ways of living were shaped not only by bodies and environments, but by patterns of knowledge carried through shared experience. These patterns, built slowly over time, formed what can be understood as culture, a quiet accumulation of learned behavior, techniques, and meaning that guided how individuals interacted with the world and with each other. Toolmaking offers one of the clearest traces of these differences. Some groups produced implements with consistent shapes and methods, suggesting that techniques were carefully maintained and passed from one generation to the next. The repetition of form indicates more than simple utility. It reflects memory, teaching, and a shared understanding of how materials could be transformed. In other cases, tools appear more variable, shaped by immediate needs rather than established patterns. These distinctions point toward differences in how knowledge was organized and transmitted within each group. Complexity in toolmaking does not exist in isolation. It often connects with other aspects of behavior, including planning and cooperation. Creating a refined tool may require selecting the right material, shaping it through multiple steps, and anticipating how it will be used. Such processes suggest a continuity of thought that extends beyond the present moment, linking action with expectation in a way that supports more efficient interaction with the environment. Beyond tools, there are indications of symbolic behavior in some human groups. Objects that appear to have been modified without clear practical purpose, markings that follow repeated patterns, or the use of pigments, all suggest an engagement with meaning that extends beyond immediate survival. These expressions are subtle, often difficult to interpret, yet they hint at a capacity to assign significance to objects and actions, creating a layer of experience that is not purely functional. Communication forms the foundation through which such cultural elements are shared. While the exact nature of language in different human species remains uncertain, anatomical features and archaeological evidence suggest a range of possibilities. Some groups may have developed more complex systems of vocalization, supported by physical structures that allowed for varied sound production. Others may have relied more heavily on gesture, expression, and shared context to convey information. Regardless of form, communication enabled coordination, teaching, and the maintenance of group cohesion. Within the genus Homo, variations in communication and cultural expression likely contributed to differences in how groups adapted to their environments. The ability to share detailed information about resources, movement, or techniques could enhance survival, allowing individuals to benefit from collective knowledge rather than relying solely on personal experience. Cultural practices also influence how groups respond to change. Those with more flexible systems of knowledge transmission may have been better equipped to adjust to new conditions, incorporating new strategies or modifying existing ones. This adaptability extends beyond tools, affecting social organization, movement patterns, and interactions with other groups. The advantages provided by culture are not always visible in the physical record, yet they shape outcomes over time. Groups that could preserve and expand their knowledge base may have maintained greater stability, especially in environments that required continual adjustment. Others, with different patterns of learning and communication, followed their own paths, shaped by the interplay between tradition and circumstance. In these varied expressions of culture, the human story becomes richer and more complex. Differences in behavior, communication, and meaning form another layer of diversity, one that exists alongside physical variation, contributing to the many ways in which human groups lived, adapted, and endured. Movement across the earth did not follow a single rhythm. Some human groups remained within familiar ranges, returning to known areas as seasons shifted, while others extended their paths outward, gradually reaching landscapes that had never held their presence before. These differing patterns of mobility shaped how each group encountered the world, and how they responded to its changing conditions. Within certain populations, movement was closely tied to predictable cycles. Resources appeared and disappeared in patterns that could be anticipated, guiding repeated journeys along established routes. These movements formed a kind of quiet continuity, where knowledge of terrain, water sources, and seasonal changes was carried forward and refined over time. Familiarity provided stability, allowing groups to navigate their environment with confidence and precision. Other groups moved in ways that extended beyond these recurring paths. Their journeys reached farther, sometimes crossing natural boundaries that might have discouraged movement in earlier periods. Rivers were followed to their sources, coastlines traced over long distances, and stretches of open land crossed in search of new opportunities. These expansions were not sudden leaps, but gradual extensions built from accumulated knowledge and a capacity to adapt. Within the genus Homo, these differences in mobility contributed to the diversity of human presence across continents. Some species spread widely, occupying a range of environments that varied in climate and geography. Others remained more localized, adapting deeply to specific conditions, but extending less far beyond them. Each pattern reflects a balance between exploration and familiarity, between the known and the unknown. Adaptability played a central role in enabling movement into new environments. Entering an unfamiliar landscape required adjustments in behavior, diet, and sometimes physical tolerance. New plants, animals, and climatic conditions presented both opportunities and challenges. Groups that could modify their strategies, learning to make use of available resources, were more likely to sustain themselves as they moved. This process of adaptation often unfolded gradually. Initial encounters with a new environment might involve periods of difficulty, followed by the development of techniques better suited to local conditions. Over generations, these adjustments became part of the group's knowledge, allowing them to move with greater confidence through territories that were once unfamiliar. Exploration, in this context, was not driven by a single purpose, but emerged from a combination of necessity and possibility. Changes in climate, shifts in resource availability, and the natural tendency to follow movement patterns of animals or water all contributed to the extension of human presence. Each step outward added to the range of environments in which humans could exist. The distance traveled by different groups varied widely. Some extended across vast regions, leaving traces that spanned continents, while others remained within more confined areas, their presence concentrated and localized. These variations do not reflect a single measure of success, but different ways of engaging with the world. Mobility also influenced contact between groups. As populations moved, their paths sometimes intersected, creating opportunities for interaction, exchange, or coexistence. In other cases, movement led to separation, with groups becoming isolated in new regions and developing distinct characteristics over time. In these patterns of movement and settlement, the human story unfolds as a series of journeys, each shaped by the interplay between environment, knowledge, and adaptability. The Earth became not a fixed backdrop, but a landscape continuously explored and inhabited in different ways, reflecting the varied paths taken by those who moved across it. Connections between individuals extend beyond immediate proximity, forming networks that link groups across distances and time. These connections are not visible in bone or stone alone, yet they shape how knowledge moves, how resources are distributed, and how survival is sustained within changing conditions. Among some human populations, social structures expanded beyond small, isolated groups. Individuals maintained relationships that reached into neighboring communities, creating a web of interaction that allowed information and support to flow across wider areas. Within Homo sapiens, this expansion appears to have taken on a particularly significant role, enabling cooperation at scales that extended beyond immediate kinship. The sharing of knowledge formed a central part of these networks. Techniques for tool making, strategies for locating resources, and understanding of environmental patterns could move from one group to another, carried through interaction and communication. This exchange allowed information to accumulate rather than remain confined, building a collective memory that extended beyond any single community. Communication supported this process, providing the means through which ideas and experiences could be conveyed with clarity and detail. While the exact forms of language varied, the ability to transmit complex information allowed groups to coordinate actions, plan movements, and respond to challenges more effectively. This capacity to share and refine knowledge over time contributed to a deeper adaptability, one that was not limited to individual experience. Trade represents another dimension of cooperation. Objects and materials moved between groups, sometimes across considerable distances. Items that were not available in one region could be obtained through exchange, creating a flow of resources that extended beyond local environments. This movement of goods reflects not only practical needs, but also the relationships that made such exchanges possible. Trust and repeated interaction formed the basis for these connections, reinforcing social bonds over time. The advantages of cooperation become more apparent when considering the uncertainties faced by human populations. Variability in climate, resource availability, and other pressures required flexible responses. Groups that could rely on wider networks had access to additional sources of information and support, increasing their capacity to adjust. In times of scarcity, connections with neighboring groups could provide alternatives, reducing the risk associated with isolation. Within the broader context of the genus Homo, different patterns of cooperation likely existed. Some groups may have maintained more localized interactions, while others developed broader networks that linked multiple communities. These differences influenced how knowledge and resources were distributed, shaping the ways in which each group navigated its environment. Cooperation also affects how innovations spread. A new technique or tool, once developed, could move through connected groups, becoming more widely adopted. This diffusion allowed beneficial practices to extend beyond their point of origin, contributing to a cumulative process of development that enhanced survival over time. The presence of larger social networks does not eliminate challenges, but it provides additional pathways through which they can be addressed. By linking individuals and groups into a broader system of interaction, cooperation creates a framework that supports resilience. It allows human populations to draw on shared knowledge and resources, extending their capacity to respond to a world that remains in constant change. In these networks of connection, the human story gains another layer, one defined not only by individual adaptation, but by the relationships that bind groups together across space and time. There comes a stage in the long passage of human history when the presence of many begins to narrow, not suddenly, but through a gradual thinning that unfolds across generations. The broad diversity that once filled different regions becomes more concentrated, the spaces between groups widening until only a few remain within the same span of time. This final overlap did not occur everywhere at once. It unfolded unevenly across landscapes, shaped by local conditions and patterns of movement. In some regions, different human groups continued to exist side by side for extended periods, their timelines still intersecting. In others, one presence faded earlier, leaving behind traces that marked where it had once been. The narrowing of coexistence was a process, not a single moment, defined by a slow shift in balance. Archaeological evidence offers glimpses into these shared intervals. Layers of sediment reveal sequences where tools associated with different groups appear within close proximity, sometimes separated by only short spans of time. In certain locations, the materials used, the techniques applied, and the patterns of habitation suggest that multiple human populations occupied the same general areas, even if not at the exact same moment. These overlapping traces point toward a world where boundaries were permeable and presence was shared. Within the genus Homo, this convergence represents the closing of a long period of diversity. Species that had developed along separate paths found themselves within the same regions, navigating similar environments as conditions continued to change. Their interactions, whether direct or indirect, formed part of the final chapters of coexistence. The regions where overlap occurred were often shaped by geography. Valleys, river systems, and areas with stable resources drew multiple groups into proximity. These locations provided the conditions necessary for sustained habitation, making them points where different populations could exist within the same broader landscape. Over time, these shared spaces became the settings in which the final interactions between human species unfolded. The evidence for these interactions remains subtle. There are no clear records of encounters, no direct accounts of how these groups perceived one another. Instead, what remains are patterns in the distribution of artifacts, the timing of fossil remains, and the genetic traces that persist within modern populations. Together, these elements suggest that coexistence was not merely theoretical, but a lived reality during certain periods. As time progressed, the intervals of overlap grew shorter. One group would recede from a region, while another remained, gradually reducing the number of distinct human forms sharing the same time and place. This reduction did not follow a uniform path, but varied across different areas, reflecting the complex interplay of environmental pressures, competition, and chance. The final periods before disappearance are marked by this diminishing presence. Fossil records show decreasing numbers, and archaeological sites become less frequent. The traces left behind grow more scattered, as if the continuity of these populations was slowly dissolving into the broader landscape. What remains is a sense of contraction, a narrowing of diversity that once extended across wide regions. In this quiet convergence, the human story shifts from multiplicity toward singularity. The overlapping timelines that once defined the past begin to separate, leaving fewer threads to weave together. The world that had supported many forms of humanity gradually becomes inhabited by fewer, until only one remains to carry the narrative forward. Along the southern edges of Europe, where the land opens toward warmer climates and shifting coastlines, traces of one of the final Neanderthal populations appear in the archaeological record. These traces are fewer than before, more scattered, as though their presence had begun to withdraw into smaller and more isolated pockets. What remains offers a glimpse of a population nearing the end of its long continuity. Sites in this region preserve evidence of habitation that extends into the later periods of Neanderthal existence. Stone tools, shaped in familiar ways, appear alongside remnants of daily life, suggesting that established practices continued even as conditions around them changed. The persistence of these patterns reflects a continuity of knowledge, carried forward despite the pressures that were gradually reshaping their world. Within Neanderthals, the decline does not appear as a sudden disappearance, but as a gradual reduction in numbers. Fossil evidence becomes less frequent, and the distribution of sites contracts. Areas that once supported broader populations show fewer signs of occupation, indicating that these groups were becoming more limited in both size and range. Isolation becomes more apparent in this later stage. As populations shrink and territories narrow, contact between groups decreases. The exchange of individuals, ideas, and genetic variation becomes less frequent, reinforcing the separation between remaining communities. This isolation can amplify the challenges already faced by small populations, reducing resilience in the face of environmental change and other pressures. The archaeological record from southern Europe suggests that these final groups occupied regions that may have offered relatively stable conditions compared to more northern areas. Milder climates and accessible resources could have supported their continued presence for a longer period, allowing them to persist even as other populations declined elsewhere. These areas functioned as refuges where survival remained possible for a time. Despite this relative stability, the signs of contraction remain evident. The number of sites decreases, and the intervals between them grow larger. The continuity that once connected different regions begins to fragment, leaving isolated pockets rather than an interconnected presence. Over time, these pockets themselves diminish, their traces becoming increasingly rare. The final known existence of Neanderthals is marked by this quiet fading. There is no clear boundary where their presence ends, no single moment that defines their disappearance. Instead, the record shows a gradual thinning, a reduction in evidence that reflects a diminishing population. The last individuals lived within a world that was already changing, shaped by forces that had been building over generations. Genetic evidence suggests that even as their numbers declined, interactions with other human groups continued in some regions. These encounters contributed to the blending of lineages, leaving traces that persist beyond their physical disappearance. In this way, their presence extends forward, carried within the genetic composition of later populations. The end of the Neanderthals does not appear as a dramatic event, but as a slow transition where one form of human life recedes while others remain. The landscapes they inhabited continue to hold fragments of their existence, preserved in layers that speak of a long and complex history. In the quiet remnants of southern Europe, their story reaches its final, visible stage, not as a sudden conclusion, but as a gradual fading into the broader continuity of human existence. There are moments in the human story where presence fades without leaving a clear edge, where a population recedes not through a single visible event, but through a quiet absence that becomes more complete with time. The Denisovans belong to this kind of disappearance, their existence traced not through a broad collection of remains, but through fragments that offer only partial glimpses. The physical evidence associated with the Denisovans is remarkably limited. A small number of bones and teeth, discovered in a handful of locations, form the foundation of what is known about their physical presence. Unlike other human groups with more extensive fossil records, their remains do not provide a continuous or detailed account of their distribution, variation, or daily life. This scarcity creates a sense of distance, as though their story is present but only faintly illuminated. Despite this limited fossil record, genetic evidence reveals that they once occupied a wide range of regions. Their DNA appears in populations across parts of Asia and into areas of Oceania, indicating that their presence extended far beyond the few sites where physical remains have been found. This contrast between sparse fossils and widespread genetic traces suggests that much of their history remains hidden, preserved in ways that are not immediately visible. The disappearance of the Denisovans does not present a clear narrative. There is no single region where their final presence can be firmly identified, no definitive sequence of events that marks their decline. Instead, the evidence suggests a gradual fading, similar to patterns observed in other human groups, yet even less defined due to the limited material available for study. Within the broader context of the genus Homo, their absence becomes part of a larger pattern of reduction in diversity. As time progresses, fewer distinct human populations remain, and those that persist carry traces of earlier connections within their genetic makeup. For the Denisovans, this legacy is especially prominent, as their continued presence is known primarily through the DNA they contributed to later populations. These genetic contributions provide some of the clearest evidence of their existence. Segments of Denisovan DNA remain embedded within modern human genomes, influencing certain traits and adaptations. In this way, their presence continues, not as a separate population, but as part of a shared biological inheritance that extends into the present. The reasons for their disappearance remain uncertain. Environmental changes, interactions with other human groups, and the challenges faced by small or isolated populations may all have played roles. Yet the limited fossil record makes it difficult to determine how these factors combined or which were most significant. The absence of clear evidence leaves space for multiple possibilities, none of which can be confirmed with certainty. This uncertainty extends to their full range and diversity. It is possible that Denisovan populations varied more than current evidence suggests, occupying different environments and developing distinct characteristics across their range. Without additional discoveries, much of this variation remains beyond reach, hinted at only through indirect traces. In the quiet persistence of their genetic legacy, the Denisovans remain part of the human story, even as their physical presence has faded. Their disappearance does not mark an end that can be clearly defined, but a transition into a different form of existence, carried forward within the bodies of those who came after, leaving behind a mystery that continues to unfold with each new discovery. In remote stretches of the earth, where landscapes remain difficult to access and records are easily lost, the possibility of extended survival lingers quietly within scientific thought. It does not arise from clear evidence, but from the understanding that absence of proof is not always proof of absence. In places where discovery is limited, the past can remain concealed far longer than expected. Some theories suggest that certain human populations may have persisted beyond the timelines currently established by fossil evidence. These ideas often focus on isolated regions, areas where geographic barriers reduce contact and allow small groups to remain separated from broader patterns of change. Islands, mountainous terrain, and dense environments can all create conditions where populations endure in relative seclusion, following paths that differ from those observed elsewhere. Within the genus Homo, such possibilities reflect the diversity that once existed across many environments. If small populations could survive in isolated settings, adapting to local conditions over long periods, it becomes conceivable that some groups might have continued longer than the current record suggests. These scenarios are not based on direct findings, but on patterns observed in how isolation can influence survival and evolution. The challenge lies in the nature of evidence itself. Fossils are rare, and their preservation depends on specific conditions that are not present everywhere. In regions where heat, humidity, or geological activity accelerate decomposition, physical remains may not endure long enough to be discovered. Even if a population persisted, the likelihood of leaving a trace that survives to the present can be extremely low. Archaeological signs of habitation can also be difficult to detect in such environments. Organic materials degrade, and tools made from perishable substances may not be preserved. Without durable artifacts, the presence of a population may leave little indication of its existence. This creates gaps in the record, where continuity may have existed, but evidence has not. The idea of late survival is further complicated by the need for clear identification. Even if remains are found, distinguishing one human species from another requires sufficient detail, often from well preserved skeletal features or genetic material. In many cases, fragments are incomplete, making it difficult to assign them confidently to a specific group. This uncertainty limits the ability to confirm extended timelines. Scientific caution plays an important role in approaching these possibilities. While it is reasonable to consider that some populations may have persisted longer than currently known, conclusions must be grounded in verifiable evidence. Without clear data, such ideas remain hypotheses, open to revision as new discoveries emerge. This careful approach ensures that interpretations remain consistent with the available information, even as it acknowledges the limits of current knowledge. Occasionally, new findings extend known timelines, revealing that certain populations existed later than previously thought. These discoveries demonstrate that the record is not fixed and that understanding continues to evolve. Each edition reshapes the broader picture, sometimes confirming earlier suggestions, sometimes introducing entirely new perspectives. In this space between evidence and possibility, the human story retains an element of uncertainty. Remote regions, incomplete records, and the challenges of preservation leave open the potential for histories that have not yet been fully revealed. The idea that some human groups may have endured longer than expected remains part of this unfolding narrative, held carefully between what is known and what may still be discovered. No single moment marks the turning point where one human lineage continues while others fade. Instead, survival appears as the result of many small factors aligning over long stretches of time, each one subtle on its own, yet together shaping a path that remains uninterrupted. Among these factors, adaptability stands quietly at the center. The ability to adjust behavior in response to changing conditions allowed certain populations to move between environments without becoming fixed within a single way of life. Diets could shift, tools could change, and patterns of movement could be altered as landscapes transformed. This flexibility reduced dependence on any one resource or setting, allowing continuity even when familiar conditions no longer remained. Within the genus Homo, different groups expressed adaptability in varied ways. Some were highly specialized, finely tuned to specific environments where they thrived for long periods. Others developed broader strategies, capable of functioning across a wider range of conditions. This difference does not imply superiority in a simple sense, but it does suggest that flexibility may have provided an advantage as environments became less predictable. Social structures also played a role in sustaining survival. Larger and more interconnected groups could share resources, support individuals during periods of difficulty, and maintain continuity through cooperation. Knowledge did not remain isolated within individuals, but moved through communities, allowing experience to accumulate and extend beyond a single lifetime. This collective memory supported more consistent responses to recurring challenges. Cultural practices contributed to this continuity as well. Techniques for tool making, methods of gathering and preparing food, and patterns of communication all formed part of a system that could be refined over time. Innovations did not need to be rediscovered with each generation, but could be preserved, adapted, and expanded. This accumulation of knowledge created a framework that supported ongoing adjustment to new conditions. Mobility further enhanced this capacity. The ability to move across landscapes, to seek out new environments when existing ones became less viable, provided additional pathways for survival. Movement was not random, but guided by understanding of terrain, climate, and resource distribution. This awareness allowed populations to navigate change rather than remain confined within it. Environmental factors also shaped outcomes, often in ways that cannot be fully reconstructed. Climate shifts, resource availability, and geographic barriers influenced where populations could persist and how they interacted with one another. These forces acted alongside human behavior, creating a complex interplay that determined which groups continued and which did not. The absence of a single definitive cause reflects the complexity of these interactions. No one factor, whether biological, environmental, or cultural, can fully explain why one lineage endured while others disappeared. Instead, survival emerges from the combination of many elements, each contributing in ways that are not always visible in isolation. Chance, too, holds a place within this process. Small events, random variations, and unpredictable changes can influence outcomes over long periods. A slight difference in timing, location, or circumstance may alter the course of a population, shaping its trajectory in ways that cannot be anticipated. What remains is a pattern rather than a clear explanation, a convergence of adaptability, cooperation, knowledge, and circumstance. The continuation of one human lineage does not represent a simple progression or an inevitable outcome, but the result of a balance that was maintained while others were not. In this quiet convergence, survival becomes less a single achievement and more a sustained alignment of many factors, carried forward across generations without a single point where it can be fully explained. For a long time, the story of human origins was arranged as a simple sequence, a line moving steadily forward, each form replacing the one before it. It offered clarity and direction, a sense that the past could be organized into a clear progression. Yet as new discoveries accumulated, that simplicity began to dissolve, replaced by something more intricate and less easily contained. Fossils uncovered in unexpected places, along with the growing ability to study ancient DNA, revealed patterns that did not align with a single line of descent. Instead of one path leading directly to the present, multiple branches appeared, extending outward and sometimes reconnecting. The image of a straight ascent gave way to a structure more like a web, where different human groups existed at the same time, influencing one another in subtle and lasting ways. Within the genus Homo, this shift in understanding has been particularly significant. Species once thought to exist in separate periods are now known to have overlapped, sharing environments, and, in some cases, exchanging genetic material. This overlapping presence alters the narrative, replacing isolation with interaction and succession with coexistence. New discoveries continue to reshape this picture. Each fossil, each fragment of DNA adds detail to the broader structure, sometimes confirming existing ideas, other times challenging them. Findings that reveal unexpected traits or connections require adjustments in interpretation, reminding us that the story is not fixed but continuously refined. Science does not move toward a final, unchanging version of the past, but evolves alongside the evidence it uncovers. What was once believed to be a simple progression now appears as a dynamic system of divergence and convergence. Populations separated over time, adapting to different conditions, yet retained the capacity to reconnect when their paths crossed. These interactions blur the boundaries between groups, creating a continuity that extends beyond individual classifications. The process of revision is central to this evolving understanding. Early interpretations were shaped by limited evidence, often based on a small number of fossil finds. As more material became available, those interpretations were revisited, expanded, or replaced. This pattern reflects the nature of scientific inquiry, where conclusions remain open to change as new information emerges. Differences between past and present understanding highlight how perspective shifts with evidence. What once seemed certain becomes provisional, and ideas that appeared complete are revealed as partial. This does not diminish earlier work, but places it within a broader context, showing how knowledge grows through accumulation and reconsideration. The transition from a linear model to a more complex structure also changes how human diversity is viewed. Instead of a single dominant path, the past is recognized as a network of related forms, each contributing to the overall story. This perspective emphasizes connection rather than separation, illustrating how different human groups were part of a shared process. As the human family tree is rewritten, it becomes less a fixed diagram and more an evolving representation shaped by ongoing discovery. The lines that define it are not rigid, but flexible, adjusting as new evidence is integrated. This fluidity reflects the complexity of the past, where multiple forms of humanity existed, interacted, and changed over time. In this unfolding revision, the human story gains depth, moving beyond simplicity into a structure that reflects the richness of its own history, where each new finding adds another thread to a web that continues to expand. Between the fragments that have been found and the stories they suggest, there remain wide intervals of silence, spaces where the record simply does not speak. These gaps are not empty in the sense of absence, but in the sense of something yet unrecovered, traces that once existed but have not endured or have not yet been seen. Fossil evidence forms the foundation of much of what is known, yet it is unevenly preserved. Certain environments favor the survival of bone, while others erase it almost entirely. Over long spans of time, entire populations can pass through landscapes that leave no lasting imprint in stone. The result is a record that feels incomplete, not because history was sparse, but because preservation was selective. What remains offers only partial glimpses, moments caught while countless others have been lost. Within the genus Homo, this incompleteness leaves open the possibility that additional human groups once existed beyond those currently identified. Small populations, especially those in isolated or transient environments, may have left little evidence behind. Their presence could have been brief or geographically limited, making discovery unlikely without precise conditions. These unseen branches remain part of the broader possibility, suggested by the gaps themselves. Behavior introduces another layer of uncertainty. Tools and bones can indicate aspects of daily life, yet they do not fully reveal how individuals interacted, communicated, or perceived their world. The presence of crafted objects suggests intention and knowledge, but the details of thought, language, and social meaning remain largely out of reach. Even when traces of symbolic activity appear, their interpretation is often indirect, shaped by comparison rather than direct understanding. This distance between evidence and experience creates unanswered questions that extend beyond physical remains. How different groups understood their environments, how they organized their societies, and how they expressed ideas are aspects that leave only faint impressions. The material record can suggest patterns, but much of the inner dimension of these lives remains concealed, preserved only in ways that cannot yet be fully accessed. Advances in technology have expanded the ability to explore these questions, particularly through the study of ancient DNA. Genetic analysis can reveal relationships, migrations, and interactions that are not visible through fossils alone, yet even this approach has limits. DNA degrades over time, and its preservation depends on specific conditions. In many regions, especially those with warmer climates, genetic material does not survive long enough to be studied, leaving entire areas of the past beyond its reach. Interpretation itself introduces further limitations. Each discovery must be understood within a framework that is shaped by current knowledge, which is always evolving. New findings can alter previous conclusions, revealing that earlier interpretations were incomplete or based on limited data. This ongoing revision reflects both the strength and the boundaries of scientific understanding, where certainty remains provisional and open to change. The unknown does not diminish what has been learned, but it defines the edges of that knowledge. It marks where evidence ends and possibility begins, where the story remains unfinished. Each gap suggests not only what is missing, but what might still be found, hidden within layers that have yet to be explored. In these quiet spaces of uncertainty, the human story continues to unfold, shaped as much by what has not yet been discovered as by what already has, extending beyond the limits of current understanding into a past that remains only partially revealed. Beneath layers of soil that have not yet been disturbed, in regions where excavation has only begun or has not reached at all, the past remains quietly present, waiting without urgency. The record that exists today is not complete, and the spaces where knowledge has yet to reach hold the potential to reshape what is understood. New excavation sites continue to emerge, often in places that were once overlooked or considered unlikely to yield significant findings. Advances in surveying methods allow researchers to identify subtle variations in terrain, guiding them toward locations where evidence may be preserved. As exploration expands into new regions, the range of discovery grows, bringing with it the possibility of uncovering remains that alter established timelines or reveal entirely unfamiliar forms of human life. Within the genus Homo, each new find has the potential to adjust the structure of the human story. A single fossil, if well preserved, can introduce traits that do not align with known groups, suggesting connections or distinctions that were previously unrecognized. These discoveries do not simply add to the existing framework, but can reshape it, prompting reconsideration of how different populations are related. The study of ancient DNA has become one of the most transformative tools in this process. Techniques for extracting and analyzing genetic material have improved steadily, allowing scientists to recover information from remains that would once have yielded little insight. Even fragments that appear unremarkable can contain sequences that reveal ancestry, migration patterns, and interactions between groups. As these methods advance, the range of environments from which DNA can be recovered is also expanding. New approaches aim to identify genetic material preserved in sediments, not just in bones or teeth. This means that the presence of human populations might be detected even in the absence of visible remains, offering a way to explore regions where traditional evidence is scarce. Such developments open new pathways for understanding the distribution and diversity of ancient humans. Unexpected findings remain a constant possibility. Discoveries that challenge existing categories or reveal previously unknown populations remind us that the current picture is provisional. The appearance of a new species or the recognition of a complex pattern of interconnection can shift the narrative in ways that were not anticipated. These moments do not disrupt the story, but deepen it, adding layers that reflect its complexity. The process of discovery is gradual, shaped by careful investigation and the accumulation of evidence over time. Each finding is examined, compared, and integrated into a broader context where it contributes to an evolving understanding. This steady progression ensures that changes in interpretation are grounded in reliable data, even as they expand the scope of what is known. As the story continues to develop, it becomes clear that it is not fixed in its current form. The structure that exists today reflects the evidence available, but remains open to revision. Future discoveries may extend timelines, reveal new connections, or introduce elements that alter how the past is understood. In the quiet persistence of undiscovered traces, the human story remains unfinished, held within layers that have yet to be uncovered. Each step forward in exploration and technology brings new clarity, while also revealing how much still lies beyond reach, waiting to be found. In the quiet continuity of the present, there are traces that do not belong only to now, but extend backward into lives that no longer walk the earth. They do not appear as visible forms or distinct presences, yet they remain, carried forward in ways that are subtle and enduring. The disappearance of other human groups did not erase them entirely. Within the structure of our own biology, fragments of their existence continue to persist. Segments of DNA, inherited across long chains of generations, remain embedded within modern populations. These genetic traces are not separate or easily distinguished, but integrated into the whole, shaping aspects of physiology in ways that often go unnoticed. Within the genus Homo, this continuity reflects a history of connection rather than isolation. The boundaries that once separated different groups were not absolute, and interactions between them left lasting imprints. These imprints endure not as complete identities, but as elements woven into a shared biological inheritance. Beyond the body, the earth itself holds other forms of memory. Tools shaped from stone, fragments of habitation, and altered landscapes remain preserved in layers that record the presence of those who came before. These traces do not speak in direct terms, yet they provide evidence of activity, of adaptation, and of lives lived within environments that have since changed. Each fragment contributes to a broader understanding, forming a record that extends across time. The recognition that humanity was once more diverse alters the sense of what it means to exist in the present. Rather than a singular lineage moving uninterrupted through time, the past reveals a multiplicity of forms, each navigating its own path. These paths sometimes converged, sometimes diverged, creating a network of relationships that cannot be reduced to a single line. Now, only one of those forms remains as a distinct and continuous presence. This does not represent a simple progression or a predetermined outcome, but the result of processes that unfolded over long periods, shaped by many factors that interacted in complex ways. The others, though no longer present in the same form, have not vanished without leaving an imprint. Their influence continues in ways that extend beyond physical traces. The adaptations they developed, the interactions they engaged in, and the environments they inhabited all contributed to the broader context in which human history unfolded. These contributions form part of a larger continuity where past and present are connected through layers that are not always immediately visible. The story that emerges from this understanding is not complete. Each discovery adds detail, yet also reveals how much remains unknown. The record continues to expand, shaped by new findings and new methods of exploration. What is understood today may change as additional evidence comes to light, altering the structure of the narrative once again. In this ongoing process, the past is not fixed, but remains open, extending forward as new insights emerge. The traces left behind, whether in DNA or in the earth, continue to inform this unfolding account, offering glimpses into lives that are no longer directly present. Humanity, as it exists now, carries within it the echoes of these earlier forms, not as separate entities, but as integrated elements of a shared history. The continuity that connects them does not end, but continues, shaped by discovery, by interpretation, and by the gradual unfolding of a story that remains incomplete.